few weeks ago, I made this claim. I believe that Space Jam: A New Legacy will crush its predecessor upon release. I have no doubts about that. Well, it's time for Space Jam: A New Legacy to put its money where its mouth is and see whether waiting 25 years to make a sequel was worth it in the end. Yep, it took Warner Brothers pretty much all of my life on this planet to release a sequel to a film that is universally adored thanks to nostalgia, despite the film being as good as a prostate exam feels. Awkward and painful. Check out my video on Looney Tunes' relationship with live action to understand why that is. Instead of Michael Jordan, we have LeBron James. Instead of Earth and the Toon World, it's virtual space. Instead of 2D, we have CGI. Instead of a theme park alien, we have an AI and a team of virtual monsters. Instead of being a sex symbol, we have Blow the Bunny looking normal by animated rabbit standards, which led the sexually oppressed closeted furries of the internet to throw a colossal tantrum over it. If you care that much about the looks of a cartoon rabbit, then you honestly have a problem. Warner Brothers looked at the film and said, fuck it, let's just make this a massive showcase of all the intellectual properties we have, because apparently the Bugs Bunny, Daffy and Looney Tunes crew don't have enough star power to keep a Space Jam sequel afloat. The film smashed the box office as Warner Brothers would have wanted, but public opinion is spicy, to say the least. So it's time for me to add to that discourse by first looking at what it did right. There's no beating around the bush here, this film looks fucking stunning. When you see just how many digital and VFX artists are listed in the credits, it's no wonder the collective sum of their efforts would take the breath away. It's easy to proclaim that computer-generated animation is instantly outdated once it leaves the cinema, such as the case for the 2019 Lion King remake, but this vibrant tapestry of digital excess looks so damn enticing and magical to where even a pessimist like me can be in awe of it. Whether it was the game's scoreboard, the animated algae rhythm, the monsters, or the interior of the serververse, it all looks so clean and crisp and well implemented. Best of all, the 3D rendered Looney Tunes were not abominations, they were actually true to their form, which is a major sigh of relief, even if Lola did look like a squirrel storing nuts for the winter. You can tell that 25 plus years of technological growth has occurred since Stan's balloon inflation from the first movie, which showcases in my opinion that this is a tour de force in visual effects making and has ensured that this Space Jam, much like the original, can continue to appease the eyes for many generations to come. Many were worried that the 2D would be consigned to the reject pile, as Algae Rhythm noted the tunes ended up in, but thankfully it wasn't to be. Highlighting the inherent qualities of both, it was heartwarming to see this film offer up 20 unabashed minutes to give us a definitive highlight of why 2D animation should be still appreciated by mainstream movie audience. We had respects paid to DC's animated universe with its familiar art style present, and we got to see LeBron put through Bugs Bunny's wackiness before the basketball game shifted things up a gear and then sent the visual aplomb into overdrive with graphics spewing from all angles. While the green screen imposing of tunes onto existing archive film footage was underwhelming in execution, seeing the tunes in this environment was pleasing fan service nonetheless. Hell, seeing Granny and Speedy Gonzalez kick all sorts of ass in the Matrix world, and then have Foghorn Leghorn riding a dragon from Game of Thrones in Daenerys cosplay while verbally gesticulating got more laughter out of me than I ever thought it would have been possible. The frame rate of said visuals is consistent throughout, as were the lighting on the actors, to where the idea of them speaking and standing in blue and green screen was not intrusive. There were a few times though where the edit between cuts wasn't done to match movements from dialogue perspectives, and the backgrounds on the 2D looked very flat along the x-axis, meaning that the movement was a little bit disconcerting, but I can let that slide as outside of small little niggles, it worked out pretty damn well for itself. It's not too shabby, and a major tick to live up to and subsequently smash pre-existing expectations given the first one. One of my biggest concerns going into this film was that, much like the first Space Jam, this sequel would turn itself into a basketball star circle jerk and the Looney Tunes would be bystanders once more. Due to how the film's overall narrative played out, that did happen. kinda. I'll explain later. But even in the smallest moments prior to the game and subsequently once in it, these tunes had more than enough room and time to give viewers the wackiest reminder of why they have remained timeless for close to a century. Bugs, however, showed off more emotion than I would have anticipated, which is quite rarely genuine in pretty much all of Looney Tunes media. He showed off egotism, jealousy, sadness and irritation, adding layers of character to someone who is usually very one-note, chirpy and very cunning. Also, he dressed up again, proving the old adage true that it's not officially Looney Tunes unless it has cross-dressing in it. Don't believe me? Well, scenes from the last 2 live-action hybrid Looney Tunes movies and an entire cartoon series say otherwise. Where was I? Oh yeah, Daffy was off the court this time, but still as loud and vociferous as ever, proving that just spewing words out of his mouth was enough to get me laughing. Porky Pig rapped, which somehow was actually more enjoyable than it had any right to be. I know, I actually enjoyed a pig rapping cringily. How the hell did that happen? Wily Coyote and Roadrunner got 2 sublime moments to showcase their rivalry and cunning. Yosemite Sam, Elmer Fudd and Foghorn Leghorn lived up to their punching bag statuses in the shows nicely. Marvin the Martian was more than just a referee on this occasion, getting a skit to shine and show his chemistry with Bugs Bunny early on. But the fact he was a punching bag for the UFO ramp twice was disheartening, as he is my favourite of the tunes. Oh, and the big red thing that I can never remember the name of, who is conspicuously absent from the original's core group, actually showed up in this sequel and did something of note. Huzzah! The only character I was disappointed in was Speedy Gonzalez, who didn't really get much opportunity to do anything. Although, given what else was going on, I can kind of understand that 1 or 2 of the tunes would have to take a back seat compared to the rest, which explains why many wouldn't even care that Pepe Le Pew was Me Too'd out of the movie completely and doesn't appear at all. However, the biggest success for the tunes themselves was the female representatives getting a much meatier presence compared to 25 years ago. Lola Bunny was far more complex as a character, involved in the action on multiple occasions, and had a much larger speaking role compared to that original film, whilst Granny went from the sidelines to the main court, stealing scenes unexpectedly, outside from the one shown throughout the trailers which still kicked ass, and proved that the docile old lady coming out of her shell to whip some behind is a trope that still holds potential laughter in buckets. The core centerpiece of the film had double the time dedicated to it compared to the original, but it also took 15 minutes longer to hear the klaxon sound to initiate it. The shortcomings surrounding this will be noted later. All I can say is that the most entertaining part of the first film was the most entertaining part of the sequel, and on this occasion it had multiple instances of computer game-based chicanery and virtual shenanigans, adding more dynamism and fluidity to the already noted phenomenal visuals, to where the realization that you're watching basketball is made null and void, because, I'm sorry, basketball as a sport just isn't my cup of tea. However, the Looney Tunes and CGI monsters have ensured that once again I have given a shit, so we'll call it even, right? Hell, we even got commentary for this one from 2 people who I don't know the names of, which somehow was not cheesy, out of place and cringy, adding a sense of authenticity that was missing from the original to push forward a transparent lack of subtlety offered for younger viewers so they fully understood the drama unfolding. I don't like that this was done, but at least it actually felt at home given the context. I'm not going to be too critical there. We also had a genius virtual way of integrating basketball players outside of the leading actor into the movie without it feeling awfully painful to witness. No jabs at their physical and mental health struggles. Oh, it was a relief to see. Also, the halftime team talk didn't insinuate that the star athlete and his teammates were on drugs, and it delivered some hilarious character moments too. The best moment had Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner in slow motion thanks to this robot, and a bunch of Wile E. clones entering a machine and being jettisoned into a basket at once. Seriously, these 2 were stars in this film, and I could not be happier. Although this game did have some limitations outside of its control, which I will eventually get to, but it's time to look at my last positive note. I have to give Don Cheadle props for playing the egotistical, emotionally frustrated narcissist that is Algae Rhythm pretty much as good as he could. Do you get it? Algae Rhythm? It's a play on algorithm? I wonder which writer got paid heavily for coming up with that genius idea. Either way, his scenery-chewing performances were dry and blunt, entertaining in its gesticulating and mannerisms, and took an otherwise dour script and made his patronising and condescending manipulation of Dom into something that was more insidious than it rightfully should have been from the surface. Also, on the human acting side, I have to give a major shout out to whoever portrayed this WB security guard. His exchange with LeBron's agent, I think, had me unexpectedly howling and snorting with laughter. I have no idea why, but in that moment, the comedy gods looked down on me and ensured I was losing my shit, which, given that I barely laughed much in the original Space Jam, I have to say that this has at least shown some progression in quality on that front, which is nice. Either way though, it's now time for me to focus on the negatives. Unlike Michael Jordan, LeBron, or King James as he's sometimes vainly known, doesn't have an entrenched and organic redemption arc in this story to help him feel at home in this movie. Instead, what we have is a narrow-minded, fiercely driven and obstinate father who isn't anywhere near as likeable as his predecessor. He isn't an actor, which means I should not expect him to be better than Michael Jordan was in the same role, but he was still painfully sterile in his performance, in both voice and live action, which wasn't helped by the script trying to implicate that the reasoning behind this basketball game was a good one, but it was so hollow that you could see right through it. And positioning him as such a big cheese just so that interparental and business handicaps could knock him down was so awkwardly transparent that it just did not pay off. And pairing him against a greater evil in corporate manipulation just to make him look better by comparison did not create a more level playing field, and as a result, any sense of investment in the core human aspect of this film was severely neutered, as it's artificially more pronounced than the virtual bad guy whose gripes actually hold some clout. If that happens, then you're fighting a losing battle. Blame the traditionalist old guard for not adapting to the new times, though. That's just a weak thematic argument in the first place. It's something that in the 21st century should not be a thing. Surely they should know that computer games aren't the end of all evils. You can't play off a sport is more important than the creative arts mantra as a conflict point if it really has no place. At the end of the day, this film felt more like an athlete celebrity pleasure session, more so compared to the original, because of just how many times the social media clout, fame and legend of LeBron was exalted by almost everyone within earshot. It wasn't the best way to build up your lead star, and just highlights how much of a hindrance it was. LeBron James could not endear himself onto a plank of wood, let alone be the starring light in a movie for children or nostalgic-driven adults. The fact is, if Kobe Bryant, the late great legend of the sport, was the lead man as it was initially planned, then we'd have had no issues here, and it would have made a much more endearing film to see him go with the Looney Tunes to save the world. Because, let me tell you ladies and gentlemen, LeBron James, yes, he's good at what he does, that doesn't make him a good protagonist in a film. Space Jam: A New Legacy was 2 hours long. Justifying that runtime was a big ask, and it caused issues up and down the board. The idea, though, of adding half an hour extra to proceedings could have been beneficial considering that the match itself is double the length, but the amount of time dedicated to the James family variety hour and the sluggishness of their dialogue and progression of the story as a whole, combined with it taking over 20 minutes before we even saw a tune, it suffocated itself before it reached the big event. taking 1 hour and 10 minutes to establish our characters may have been beneficial for the toons in the long run, but it left our central protagonists feeling oddly lackluster, as I had no reason to care, after being bored with all that preceded it. The game itself offered up more time to allow the madness and visual plentitudes, but was also disjointed on occasion by not allowing the game itself to flow naturally, often cutting back to algae rhythm, the other team members, and the commentators, which slowed down what is supposed to be a very fast sport, at least from what I've seen of it. Elongating the game also enabled a sense of apathy for a predictable result that just made you yearn for its conclusion despite moments of flickering entertainment, casting your eye away and satiating for the time being. It meant that this film felt lopsided, bloated, and unable to really utilize itself effectively, where for a sizable portion, especially early on, you just want to see them get on with it. That first hour, despite the Looney Tunes attempts at injecting some fun into it, ruined this movie in more ways than I am willing to admit. Yes, once LeBron is with Bugs Bunny in 2D space, it is better, but when you realise just how much time is spent, it really isn't a good look. From the moment the basketball game is even teased, it's obvious that the Toons and our star athlete are going to win. And given that Algae Rhythm just continued piling on the stakes every single time they had an upward trajectory, it meant that any sense of believability in the drama and intensity of the game was gone, which is something I really didn't want to see. Combine that with a death fake out, a sappy reconciliation, and a contentious conflict that no one came out looking good from, it made the morals of being true to yourself and understanding the importance of a family connection be so superly thickly laid on in saccharine and triteness that, despite feeling some form of sadness and emotional resonance for his son, it just did not play out in the most positive way, because there were so many times in this movie I just looked at Dom and thought, why don't you just punch your dad in the face? He's being so unwavering and dense and uncooperative that even after he's realised that you are a genius and you need to have support, he didn't need to go through all this to prove it. Listen to your damn wife, LeBron. She was telling you this from the goddamn start. We didn't need this whole movie to get to this point. At least we had the subplot of Bugs reuniting his friends through the greater good, which was pleasant, but it only offered up an icebreaker to a narrative that was way too concerned with establishing its entrenched thematic and moral issues, whilst reminding us that through its target young audience's perception of the movie, failure was not an option, ever. And it meant that this entire movie feels like a waste of time. This would never have been a problem though if the tone was a little more carefree, as the overbearing seriousness made it really difficult for it to get some air and escape from it all. Yes, there were moments of comedy that did sigh through when absolutely necessary as a wonderful icebreaker, but it wasn't the most frequent, and as a result, it just meant that this story had so many hurdles to jump over that it tripped up way more than it rightfully should have. Oh, how I wish I could consider this a good thing. Padding the film out with pop culture references jettisoning from the wazoo at 1,000,000 miles a minute and highlighting the depth of your intellectual properties would have served a very celebratory purpose if this film was being released in 2023 to coincide with a century since the Warner Brothers studio broke ground. But instead, it handicaps one of the studio's most fabled properties. The original Space Jam was an obedient parading of how awesome Michael Jordan is, with the Looney Tunes playing wingmen. This film, possibly due to how unlikable LeBron is, had to implement a more plentiful backbone to secure the audience's trust, and by throwing decades of media history at you as compensation, it's a woefully empty gesture. I came to this film to see the Looney Tunes in action, not for the WB to try and turn this into a Ready Player One-esque deluge of self-aggrandizing, desperate and masturbatory excessiveness proclaiming their studio's history, most of which was so minor and awfully implemented you'd feel embarrassed to see it. And on top of that, many would look at Space Jam and say, it is a kids' film. meaning that all these references are acceptable and suitable for them, right? If that was indeed the case, why the hell is Rick and Morty, Game of Thrones, and Pennywise from the It movies being shown prominently alongside the mainstream superhero characters? This film is targeted at an older audience and felt like it. Here's references you'll recognise to ensure you have something to talk about afterwards. This is what happens when you have an unoriginal idea that overshadows everything that the film sets up for itself. What a disappointment. And there we have it. Finally, with all this covered, let's sum things up. All in all, Space Jam: A New Legacy managed to equally infuriate and humour me. I'm not entirely sure how, but god freaking damn, it managed to be the best and worst of both worlds. The main event basketball game, despite some flaws, lived up to its billing, as did the toon's representation, despite being constantly overshadowed by scrupulous pop culture padding. And it was a visual and technical powerhouse to ensure your eyes remained glued to it, despite its efforts to self-destruct from within. With a hugely dislikable star attraction making most of the human element of the film decrepit, wasteful, and fundamentally artificial, it was up to the algorithmic personification of Don Cheadle to repair the bridge between the fictional and the real, to ensure that it was at least gaining a few hands and legs to stand on. Sadly, Warner Brothers' dick-swinging contest of a self-insert soured a lot of potential this film had, losing the tunes in the shuffle despite a valiant showing in the first half and the game itself to try and save face. It's a film that was entertaining in moments and gave you what you expected alongside much more visual panache to show that maybe, just maybe, it was an exercise worth partaking in. Sure, it wasn't executed too well, but as a piece of popcorn fodder, once it reached its symbolic core, in defiance of all the problems that plagued it, I still enjoyed what I could out of it, and laughed more throughout than the first one. So, when you balance things out, I would say by a slim margin that Space Jam: A New Legacy is better than the 1996 original. It's a contentious take, but fair as far as I am concerned, as when I rated it on my Letterboxd, it only got half a star higher than its predecessor. Do you disagree? The comments section is open to hear what you have to say. I've been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this is the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.